I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess, and today I am doing a video of fantasy recommendations. This was requested by somebody in the comments of another video, and I was more than happy to oblige because I love talking about fantasy books. So this is actually going to be kind of a two-part video because when I was going through what books I wanted to talk about, I realized that a lot of my favorite fantasy books are fairy tale retellings, which should not have come as a surprise to me, but it did. So I decided I'm going to do this video of fantasy recommendations and then a second video of fairy tale retelling recommendations. So let's jump right in. First up, I've got the first book in a series that I actually haven't read the last book in because I can't find it anywhere, but the first two are great. So this is The Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. This follows a girl named Kelsey, who is a princess who has been raised kind of off, hidden away, and she gets brought back to the capital to become the queen when the time comes, but she doesn't really know a whole lot about the country. She doesn't know a lot about the politics or how to rule. So this is about her learning all that and deciding how she wants to run her country and how to protect it from the Red Queen of the neighboring country who has been taking slaves from the Tearling. This book is so good. I loved it so much. The second book is also really good. The second book gets into like this kind of dystopian, more sci-fi stuff. We go into the past and find out that what we're seeing in the current period is kind of more post-apocalyptic. It's very interesting, but this one is just very much high fantasy, politics, and also coming of age for Kelsey. And it's so good. I don't see it talked about nearly enough, which is why I put it on here. That's kind of why I put all of these on here, is they don't get talked about enough, and I think they should be talked about more. Also, that cover is so pretty. I wish my the second book was also that edition, but it's not. It's just a paperback, which is sad. All right, my next book up is a historical fantasy. This is The Ghost Bride by Yangzi Chu, whose name I'm probably mispronouncing, but I'm sorry. So this follows a girl named Lilang, I think, and she is asked by this wealthy family to become the ghost bride of their son, which means that she would marry their son who has already passed away. Which is actually a thing that they did, apparently, but it was usually more when the couple had been engaged before the death of the guy, but that's not what this is. They want her to marry this guy that she never knew, who is already dead. So, as you might imagine, it's very strange. And then she ends up getting drawn into this like kind of shadowy other world of spirits, very much reminiscent of Spirited Away, the Miyazaki movie. And this was just so atmospheric and creepy and fun and lovely. The writing was beautiful. Absolutely recommend this. All right, next up we have one that is probably like the most popular one of this list, or the one that I see talked about the most, but I wanted to put it in because it's probably one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. This is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is what would happen if a Victorian writer like Dickens or Thackeray wrote fantasy. So this is set in during the Napoleonic Wars in England. And so magic has been gone from England for years, and they only study it theoretically now, but all of a sudden these two men, Mr. Norrell and Jonathan Strange, appear, and they can use magic. They are actual practicing magicians, and they join forces in the war against Napoleon. But then there is some also kind of creepy stuff with the Fae and the living and the dead, and it's just so good. The magic is so eerie and strange. I love it. The world building is absolutely fantastic. Clarke really captures the style of 19th century authors. It really does feel like a 19th century author wrote this, which I know is probably a turnoff for some people, but for me, the Victorianist, this was great. There's footnotes, they're funny. It's a very funny book. I very much would compare it to like Vanity Fair by Thackeray in that regard. It's funny. So yeah, highly recommend this. It is thick, so it takes a lot of effort and time, but it's completely worth it. All right, next up, we actually have 3 books by one author, and one of them I don't have a physical copy because I got it as an e-arc. So first up, we've got Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton. This is another one that is what would happen if a 19th century author wrote fantasy. So this is very much like a sentimental Victorian novel, but all the characters are dragons. And it shouldn't work, but it does. It sounds like it should be so cheesy, but Walton does such an amazing job creating her characters and creating this world that it feels completely right. It's not cheesy at all. It's just like, oh yes, of course, they're dragons. It's great. It's so good. And that's what got me into reading Jo Walton. So then I have one that I actually just talked about in my best books video. This is, among others, also by Jo Walton. It is about a girl named Morwenna who can see fairies and use magic, and she ends up at an English boarding school after the death of her sister. Oh, it's so good. I already kind of went on a really long time about this one, so I won't say a whole lot, but the way that Walton makes you wonder if the magic is real or not is so well done, and I just absolutely adore this. And then the third book by Jo Walton is Or What You Will, which I think is her most recent one. And this is metafiction. And I usually don't like metafiction, but this is so good. So it follows an author, and it's narrated by the muse that's in her head. And she's dying and is writing her final novel, and she goes to Florence for the last time. So we move between seeing that and then seeing her novel in progress, which is set in a fantasy version of Florence and uses characters from Twelfth Night and The Tempest by Shakespeare. It's just so good. It's so amazing. The narration is what really makes this. The narrator, who is this muse, who's also a part of the author, but who's also characters in the story. It's so good. It's so good. If you do anything because of this video, go pick up a Jo Walton book, because it's so worth it. Every single one of her books is a new and different experience that is just unlike anything I've ever read before. I can't wait to read more by her. So I hope that you all go and pick up something by her. Please do. It's worth it. All right, these next 2 are also by one author. First up is The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley. This is a YA book about a girl named Harry Crew who comes to the country of Damar and falls in with the hill folk and ends up wielding this legendary blue sword and becoming a hero. Very high fantasy, very typical of like the 80s YA things, very comparable to Maura Pierce, who could have easily been in this video, but I just didn't happen to grab one of hers. It's a lot of fun. It's good. There's horses, there's swords. It's a great time. It's just a great time. All right, and then the other Robin McKinley book I have here is Chalice. And this is, what is this? I don't know what to call this. It's about this woman named Marisol who keeps bees, and she gets chosen as the Chalice, which is this kind of magical role in their society. So she does her magic with honey and bees. It's very interesting. It's a very quiet book. Like very peaceful and just, I don't know. It reminds me of spring. It's like spring with the flowers all coming out. I think the less you know about this book, the better it is going into it, because it's also just very hard to describe. So, I don't know. Take my word for it. It's really good. And then last up, I actually do have a fairy tale retelling. I cheated and put one on here, but this is one of my favorite fantasy authors, so she obviously needed to be in both of the videos I was making. This is Juliette Marillier. I don't actually know. I'm sorry. We all know I can't pronounce things. This is The Daughter of the Forest, which is the first book in her Seven Waters series. This is a retelling of the fairy tale The Wild Swans, which is also known as The Six Swans. So it follows this girl named Sorcha, who has 6 brothers, and they are turned by their stepmother into swans. And she has to remain silent and make these shirts for each of them in order to free them. And she gets taken by people from a neighboring country who are very suspicious of her because she won't talk. And it's just the story of her going through that. It's so good. I love Marillier's writing. I love just the way she uses the fairy tales. There is a trigger warning on here for rape, so do be aware of that if you pick this up. I think it happens fairly early on, if I recall. But yeah, it's really good. I haven't read the rest of the series. I've heard that the first 3 books are the best, and then like the other ones are kind of meh, but I can't speak to that because I've not read them. But this one, definitely great. Utterly fantastic. So those are my fantasy recommendations for today. Let me know if you've read any of them, what you thought of them, if you're going to pick up any of them because I recommended them, and what fantasy books would you recommend to me and to anyone else watching. Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much. I will chat with you soon. Bye.